You are not shopping. You are self-medicating. The purchase you made last Tuesday that you did not need. The one you barely remember making. The one that is sitting in a bag somewhere that you have not fully unpacked. That was not a transaction. That was a coping mechanism. That was the specific behavioral response of a nervous system under sustained psychological pressure, finding the fastest available relief it could locate within the approved channels of your daily environment. The approved channels were not approved by accident. They were designed to be there at the moment of your maximum anxiety, at the moment when the gap between how your life feels and how your life is supposed to feel is at its widest and most painful. At exactly the moment when the relief of acquiring something, anything, is most neurologically powerful and most financially reckless. This is not a story about willpower. It is not a story about financial discipline or the virtue of delayed gratification or the importance of distinguishing wants from needs. Those are the stories that keep the mechanism running because they locate the problem inside you as a failure of character that requires personal correction, rather than inside the system that engineered your anxiety and then sold you the relief. This video is about the system, about who built the anxiety, who profits from the relief, and what understanding the complete circuit reveals about the relationship between your psychological state and your financial future. There is an economy built not on producing things people want, but on producing the psychological states that make people unable to stop acquiring things they do not need. It is not a conspiracy. It is an industry. It operates in the open. Its mechanisms are documented in marketing textbooks, behavioral economics journals, and the quarterly earnings reports of companies that have become among the most valuable in human history by mastering a single insight. Chronic low-grade anxiety is the most reliable driver of consumption ever discovered. The insight did not arrive complete. It accumulated across the 20th century as advertisers, marketers, and eventually behavioral scientists mapped the relationship between psychological discomfort and purchasing behavior with increasing precision. What they discovered was not that anxiety makes people buy things. Everyone knew that. What they discovered was that specific types of anxiety, social inadequacy, status threat, identity uncertainty, and the vague unspecified dread that characterizes modern urban life, produce a consumption impulse that is both powerful and permanent. Unlike hunger or thirst, which are satisfied by their resolution, anxiety-driven consumption does not produce satiation. The purchase relieves the anxiety briefly. The anxiety returns. The purchase is required again. The cycle has no natural stopping point. This is not a feature that was accidentally discovered. This is a feature that was engineered into the consumer economy with the deliberateness and precision of any other engineering project. The product being sold is not the thing. The product being sold is the moment of relief. And the most profitable version of that product is one whose effects last exactly long enough to create the next purchase occasion. Before understanding who profits from your anxiety-driven consumption, you need to understand the specific architecture of how the anxiety is created and maintained. The architecture has three-way layers. Each layer was built by a different industry. Each layer reinforces the others, and together they produce a psychological environment that generates the chronic low-grade anxiety that makes the relief purchase feel not optional, but necessary. The first layer is social comparison at industrial scale. Human beings have always measured themselves against others. The psychological pain of relative status, of being below the social standard visible in your immediate environment, is ancient, powerful, and directly connected to consumption. You buy the car that signals your position in the status hierarchy you are trying to occupy. You buy the clothes that communicate membership in the social category you are attempting to enter or maintain. This is not new. What is new is the scale at which social comparison now operates. The social media platform took the human comparison instinct, evolved to operate against a reference group of perhaps 200 genuinely comparable people in your immediate physical community, and exposed it to a curated feed of aspirational highlight reels from millions of people whose lives are professionally presented for maximum status gap generation. The result is not more social comparison. It is social comparison running at a frequency and intensity that the human nervous system was not designed to sustain, producing a chronic status anxiety that is never resolved because the reference group is always escalating and the comparison is never favorable. The second layer is identity insecurity. The consumer economy of the 20th century did not simply sell products. It sold identity. It made the consumption of specific branded products the mechanism through which specific social identities were accessed, maintained, and communicated. This was the marketing revolution that transformed advertising from product communication to identity engineering. You are not buying a car. You are buying the identity of the person who drives that car. You are not buying clothes. You are buying the social story that the clothes tell about who you are. The effect of attaching identity to consumption is that the anxiety about who you are, about whether you have the right answer to the question of what you have become, becomes inseparable from the consumption of the products that provide that answer. The identity anxiety and the purchase are fused. Resolving the anxiety requires the purchase. The purchase resolves the anxiety temporarily. The anxiety returns. The purchase is required again. The third layer is existential dread. This is the hardest to document and the most profitable to exploit. Modern urban professional life generates a specific form of psychological distress that has no single cause and no simple resolution. The combination of overwork, social isolation, decision fatigue, information overload, political anxiety, and the specific modern condition of living in a world whose pace of change has outrun the human nervous system's capacity to adapt produces a background state of low-grade dread that most people carry constantly, and that most people have difficulty naming or locating. This unnamed dread is the most reliable driver of impulsive consumption, because impulsive consumption is one of the fastest available temporary reliefs for a psychological state that has no specific object and therefore no specific resolution. You cannot resolve unnamed dread by addressing its cause. You can only temporarily displace it by introducing a different, more immediate psychological experience. The dopamine hit of acquisition, the novelty of the new thing, the brief identity payoff of the purchase that interrupts the dread long enough to feel like relief. The anxiety architecture creates the demand. The relief architecture captures and monetizes it. The relief architecture is the physical, digital, and psychological infrastructure that ensures the anxiety-driven purchase impulse meets a transaction opportunity at the moment of maximum intensity. It is the one-click purchase button that ensures the impulse does not have time to encounter rational analysis. It is the infinite scroll that ensures the browsing that begins as anxiety relief continues until it produces a purchase. It is the same-day delivery that collapses the time. between the impulse and the acquisition, to the point where the intervening period, in which second thoughts, rational analysis, and financial consideration might occur, no longer exists. Amazon's entire business model is the industrial optimization of the anxiety-to-purchase conversion. Not because Jeff Bezos is malevolent, but because the company that removes the most friction from the anxiety-to-purchase path captures the most of the relief economy's enormous revenue. Every friction reduction, one-click purchasing, same-day delivery, seamless returns, is a feature designed to prevent the rational mind from engaging between the anxiety impulse and the transaction. The faster the conversion from anxiety to purchase, the less likely the rational mind is to interrupt the process. The business model is frictionlessness as competitive advantage. The fashion industry's contribution to the relief architecture is the speed and price accessibility of the acquisition. Fast fashion exists not because people need more clothes. It exists because the relief of acquiring a new item, the newness hit, the identity update, the status signal, the temporary interruption of the anxiety, requires the acquisition to be cheap enough and fast enough to be available as a genuine relief mechanism for anyone who experiences the impulse. At $20, the fast fashion item is accessible as anxiety relief for people at almost any income level. This democratizes the relief economy's reach without changing its fundamental structure. The relief is temporary, the anxiety returns, the next purchase occasion is created. The architecture of anxiety-driven consumption transfers wealth in two directions. Simultaneously, it transfers money from the consumer to the producer of the product in the moment of the transaction, and it transfers wealth-building capacity from the consumer's financial future to the producer's revenue line across every year that follows. The first transfer is visible. You can see it on your bank statement. The second transfer is invisible. It exists only as the thing that did not happen, the compounding that did not occur, the asset that was not purchased, the financial independence that receded by another increment with every anxiety-driven transaction. And the second transfer is the one that determines your financial outcome across a lifetime. Every $100 spent monthly on anxiety-driven consumption is not $100 lost. At an 8% annual return over 20 years, it is $60,000 in foregone wealth. The purchase did not cost what the price tag said. It cost a portion of your financial future, and the system that profits from it never shows you that number. The companies that have industrialized this circuit are among the most valuable organizations in human history, not because they make products people need, because they have discovered and optimized the most reliable recurring revenue mechanism ever identified: the conversion of psychological distress into purchase behavior at scale. The anxiety is renewable. The consumption it drives is recurring. The revenue it generates compounds continuously. The social media platforms occupy the most structurally advantageous position in the circuit. They profit at two separate points simultaneously. They profit from generating the anxiety. The social comparison mechanism that makes status inadequacy a chronic experience is the engagement mechanism that drives the advertising revenue. That is their entire business model. More anxiety means more engagement, means more revenue. The platform's commercial interest and the production of your psychological distress are perfectly aligned, and they profit a second time from hosting the aspirational content that shows you what your anxiety is telling you to acquire. The platform generates the wound and sells the dressing. The consumer finance industry profits from the gap between the intensity of the anxiety-driven purchase impulse and the financial reality that would otherwise prevent the transaction. Credit cards, buy now, pay later services, personal loans. All of these products exist as the mechanism that ensures the gap between what the anxiety demands and what income allows never becomes a barrier to consumption. The interest extracted from financing anxiety-driven purchases is not incidental to the economy. It is among the most profitable revenue streams in modern finance. The anxiety created the demand, the credit enabled the transaction. The interest extracted from the debt is the final profit point in the circuit. This is the complete anatomy of an extraction system that most people never see because they are inside it. The anxiety is real and feels personal. The relief mechanism feels like a free choice. The transaction feels like an expression of individual preference. None of these feelings are wrong, but none of them reveal the system that produced them. Understanding this system does not automatically free you from it. The mechanisms operate below the level of intellectual understanding. Knowing you are buying to escape anxiety does not make the anxiety less real or the relief less compelling in the moment of its maximum intensity. What the understanding does is create the possibility of structural intervention, not willpower, applied against the impulse. Willpower is insufficient against an architecture that has been optimized by billion-dollar engineering to override it. But deliberate changes to the conditions under which the circuit operates. The circuit requires unexamined anxiety. The first structural intervention is naming the anxiety specifically: social comparison anxiety, identity uncertainty, the unnamed dread of a life whose direction feels unclear. Each named anxiety can be engaged with directly. The unnamed anxiety can only be temporarily displaced by the purchase. The named anxiety can be addressed at its source, which is always a less expensive intervention than the relief product the circuit is selling you. The circuit requires frictionless access to transactions. Reintroducing friction is the second structural intervention. The 24-hour rule, no non-essential purchase, executed within 24 hours of the impulse, does not eliminate the desire. It creates the space in which the rational mind can engage before the transaction completes. Most anxiety-driven purchase impulses do not survive 24 hours of undramatic practical examination. The urgency that felt absolute in the moment reveals itself as a function of the anxiety state, rather than of any genuine need. The circuit requires the social comparison inputs that generate the chronic status anxiety. Managing your information environment deliberately is the third structural intervention. The reference group you measure your life against is the most powerful variable in your anxiety level. The feeds you consume, the communities you inhabit, the aspirational content you expose yourself to daily. These are not neutral inputs. They are the anxiety architecture's primary delivery mechanism. Changing them changes the anxiety. Changing the anxiety changes the consumption. The people who profit from this circuit are not your enemies. They are organizations responding rationally to an incentive structure that rewards the discovery and exploitation of reliable psychological vulnerabilities. What they have built was built gradually, optimized continuously, and normalized so thoroughly that most people experience it as simply the texture of modern life. It is not the texture of modern life. It is a designed environment, and designed environments can be navigated deliberately once you can see their architecture. Every purchase made to escape an anxiety that the purchase cannot resolve is a transaction that transfers your financial future to someone who understood your psychology better than you did at the moment you clicked buy. The understanding changes that equation. Use it.